Welcome to today's deep dive. I am thrilled you're joining us.
Yeah, it is great to be here.
Because our mission today is, well, it's a bit of a departure from our usual fare. Normally we find ourselves parsing through massive data sets or digging into historical biography.
Right, or dissecting the methodology of recent scientific studies.
Exactly. But today, however, we are exploring a profound and deeply visionary document. We are looking at excerpts from Chapter 18 of a book titled The Awakening.
Securing the Living Earth by Mahendra Shah.
Yes.
And it really is a remarkable piece of writing, largely because of how it is framed. I mean, this is not your standard academic essay.
No, not at all.
Nor is it a dry environmental policy white paper. Chapter 18 is titled The Human and Animal Global Summit Declaration.
It's quite the title.
It is. Shah presents it as a solemn plea and sacred commitment delivered at a hypothetical grand gathering of Earth's living kin. It reads very much like a treaty, but a treaty drafted between humanity and the rest of the natural world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core premise here is a massive shift in how we view our relationship with nature. The author is arguing that humanity needs to stop looking at animals as mere backdrops to our own story.
Or worse, as resources just waiting to be harvested.
Right. Instead, the text asks us to view them as active, sentient beings, as fellow travelers on this planet.
And for you listening, whether you are preparing for a discussion on environmental ethics or just trying to make sense of the shifting paradigms in modern ecological thought, this document perfectly encapsulates that movement.
It really does.
We're witnessing a philosophical departure from human-centric dominance. You know, that old idea that the Earth belongs to us to do with as we please. Shah's text moves us toward deep ecological harmony, where humanity is just one thread in a much larger tapestry. And it puts that shift into incredibly urgent language.
The tone of that language hits you right from the first page. It is incredibly humble. The text explicitly states that humanity is arriving at this hypothetical grand gathering not as rulers but as guests.
And not as conquerors, but as kin.
Yes. It deliberately strips away human arrogance from the opening lines. The imagery used is humanity coming to the table with bowed heads and open hearts.
It essentially functions as a formal apology. The declaration does not shy away from detailing exactly what humanity is apologizing for. There's a clear, stark admission of guilt.
Yeah, the text states that for far too long, humans have taken without asking.
It talks about building walls where there should have been bridges.
Oh.
And it goes into painful detail about silencing the songs of nature with noise, paving over ancient paths with steel and concrete.
The author doesn't pull any punches when describing our impact. The text explicitly lists destructive actions: hunting, poisoning, burning, and bulldozing. It forces the reader to confront the sheer physical violence of human expansion.
There is no sugarcoating it.
No. There is no sugarcoating the reality of what industrialization has cost the planet.
What's fascinating here is the underlying philosophical realization that Shah connects to all that destruction. The text argues that extinction is not just a biological loss.
Right.
It is not merely a species disappearing from an ecosystem's food web. Shah frames extinction as a wound to the soul of this planet. Even more intimately, he suggests that when animals vanish, humans lose a part of themselves.
We lose our wonder, our wisdom, and our wildness.
Exactly. The suffering of the natural world is not separate from human suffering. It is woven into the exact same fabric.
Losing our wonder and our wildness, that phrasing really lingers, and it sets the stage beautifully for who exactly this declaration is addressing. The writing here gets incredibly poetic.
It does.
Shah doesn't just open with dear animals. He creates this sweeping roll call. He addresses the environments first: the whispering forests, the roaring oceans.
The silent deserts and the soaring skies.
Then the focus narrows to the animals themselves, acknowledging them not just as broad species categories, but by the specific traits and forms of intelligence they possess.
Right, it calls out the elephants who remember.
The whales who sing across continents.
The bees who pollinate our survival.
The wolves who teach us loyalty.
The crows who outthink us.
And the tiny insects who sustain the soil. Then it broadens back out to all who walk, swim, fly, crawl, and bloom upon this one living earth.
By identifying those specific traits, the cultural memory of the elephant, the intellect of the crow, the social loyalty of the wolf, the author is actively dismantling the concept of human exceptionalism.
Which is that long-held assumption that humans are the main characters of Earth.
Precisely. The assumption that every other species is just background scenery. Shah is reminding us that we aren't the only ones who remember or sing or think.
Here's where it gets really interesting. By giving them these titles, the author elevates animals from being subjects that we rule over to being sovereign beings.
That distinction is the hinge for the entire chapter.
It is, because it leads directly into the core of the text, the sacred vow. The Declaration lays out 6 specific pledges that humanity is making to these sovereign beings. Let's spend some real time breaking these down, because they paint a picture of a radically different world than the one you and I live in today.
I agree. The first pledge sets the foundation for all the others. It is simply, we will listen.
Which means much more than just turning down the volume on our headphones when we go for a hike.
Right.
The text explains this as learning the languages of nature. It mentions the rustle of leaves, the cry of the wolf, the dance of the bee. It is about studying their ways, not to figure out how to exploit or control them, but to truly understand their needs and their rhythms.
Practically speaking, the text makes a vital point about where that understanding comes from. It explicitly commits to honoring indigenous knowledge.
That is a crucial part of this.
It is. Shaw recognizes that there are communities and cultures that have lived in harmony with these beings, fluently speaking these languages of nature for millennia. This pledge is an acknowledgement that modern, industrialized society needs to drop its hubris, sit down, and be the student.
Because indigenous stewardship has historically maintained biodiversity in ways that modern conservation is only just beginning to understand, that idea of listening and understanding naturally begs the question of what we do once we finally hear them. If we actually understand the needs of these animals, it forces us to look at the habitats we've altered or destroyed.
Which brings us to Pledge 2. We will protect your home.
This is where the text gets into the physical, tangible restoration of the earth.
It is a commitment to actively restore what has been degraded: the forests, rivers, wetlands, and oceans. But Shaw takes it a step further than the usual plant-a-tree rhetoric.
Much further.
The text mentions specific infrastructural actions, like creating corridors for migration. That requires recognizing that animals need to move across vast landscapes that we have currently carved up with highways, fences, and urban sprawl.
It also mentions creating sanctuaries for solitude and safe havens. It introduces the idea that animals deserve places where human influence simply doesn't reach at all, places where they are left entirely alone.
The hard rule established in this pledge is profound. Humanity will no longer trade their survival for our profit.
Holding to that rule requires a monumental shift in how we build our world, which leads us to Pledge 3. We will share space, not dominate it.
This is perhaps one of the most challenging pledges for modern society to visualize. How do we share space in a world approaching 9 billion people?
Right. But Shaw gives us some incredible design elements to think about. The practical vision here is fascinating. The text says cities will grow green, not gray. It envisions farms that nourish both the soil and soul.
That is a beautiful image.
My absolute favorite visual from the whole piece is the concept of roads that bend around habitats rather than cutting straight through them.
Yes.
If you think about your own daily commute, imagine if the highway you drive on had been planned with the primary goal of leaving a critical wetland or forest intact, even if it meant a longer, winding route for cars.
Implementing that kind of urban planning requires a complete redefinition of how a society measures success. Shaw writes that in this new paradigm, true progress is measured not by how much we take, but by how much we preserve.
Contrast that with how we currently measure progress.
Right now, global success is largely measured by gross domestic product, GDP.
And GDP goes up when we extract timber, mine minerals, and build subdivisions.
Shaw is arguing that endless extraction equating to growth is a flawed metric. Preservation and coexistence must become the ultimate metric of a successful civilization.
Which brings us to a pledge that draws some very hard lines in the sand. Pledge 4. We will end exploitation. The author does not mince words in this section.
The text is definitive. It lists specific human practices that must end under this new covenant. No more factory farms, no more wildlife trafficking, no more captivity for entertainment.
And to be clear to you listening, we are simply conveying the ideas outlined in the source material here.
Yes, we are just looking at the text. But Shaw is proposing an absolute cessation of treating animals as industrial commodities or amusements.
Taking factory farming or wildlife trafficking out of the global equation leaves a massive economic vacuum. So what fills it? The alternative future the text proposes is built on plant-based futures, ethical science, and sustainable economies.
It demands that our definition of progress must inherently include compassion. Shaw envisions an economy that simply does not cost these beings their lives.
Sustaining an economy based on compassion rather than exploitation requires a fundamental generational shift in how we think.
That is why Pledge 5 is so critical. We will teach our children to revere you.
There is a line in this section about education that really lingered with me. The text says, we must ensure that children grow up knowing the names of birds, not just brands.
That is a powerful distinction.
I started thinking about my own life. If you showed me a shoot of 50 corporate logos, I could probably name 48 of them in a matter of seconds. But if you asked me to name the different types of trees on my own street or the birds that visit my neighborhood, I would struggle immensely.
It is a brilliant, slightly uncomfortable encapsulation of the modern condition. Our children are saturated in commercial recognition before they can even read, yet they're increasingly disconnected from the natural world right outside their windows.
The educational shift Shaw's calling for is about teaching children that animals have intrinsic value.
Intrinsic value meaning they have worth simply because they exist.
Right. Not because they produce milk for us, or wool, or provide entertainment, or serve as a subject for scientific testing.
Precisely. We need to teach in our schools, our homes, and our communities that animals are beside us, not beneath us. The core lesson is that respect for life begins with respect for all life.
If a child learns to revere the insect in the soil and the bird in the sky, they are far more likely to grow into adults who build the green cities and sustainable economies mentioned in the earlier pledges.
But we don't exactly have the luxury of taking centuries to figure this out, though.
No, we do not. The author recognizes the ticking clock, which is why Pledge 6 is, we will act with urgency. The text cites the immediate compounding threats we see in the news every day: melting ice, rising seas, and burning forests.
Shaw frames this urgency in a really unique way. He doesn't just say we have to act now or we're all doomed. The text says to the animals, we know time is short, but we also know you have endured ice ages, floods, fires, and so shall we together.
That is such a vital historical perspective. It reminds the reader that these animal species are incredibly resilient. They have survived global cataclysms long before humans even walked upright.
The commitment humanity is making here is to halt climate collapse and reverse biodiversity loss. Not someday, not by 2050, but right now, so that we can survive this current human-made crisis together with them.
That concept of togetherness really anchors the final section of the text, where Shaw outlines the new covenant and our shared future. The Declaration makes it explicitly clear that the ultimate goal is not just a sustainable human future. It envisions an Earth future.
An Earth future where, as the text beautifully puts it, wolves roam free, bees hum in vibrant gardens, and whales sing undisturbed in the deep blue.
It is an incredibly vibrant, dynamic picture of a restored planet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Shaw is outlining across all 6 of these pledges is a massive psychological and spiritual shift for humanity. Historically, a significant portion of the environmental movement has been driven by negative emotions.
Driven by guilt. Look at all the pristine habitats we've destroyed.
Or driven by fear. Look at the apocalyptic, unlivable future awaiting us if we don't change our ways. This text suggests humanity needs to evolve past those motivators. We need to act not out of guilt, but out of love. Not out of fear, but out of profound reverence for the life that shares this rock with us.
You really feel that shift in the final promises of the text, the section titled The Pledge to Mend. Humans stand at this grand, hypothetical gathering and pledge to no longer be the species that broke the world. Instead, the commitment is to become the species that mended it.
There is a deep, resonant humility in how that final offer is made. The human speakers tell the assembled animals, we ask not for your trust. We know it must be earned.
They offer their hands to build, to heal, and to protect, but they actively ask for patience.
They acknowledge that humanity is going to stumble. We are going to make mistakes as we try to learn this entirely new way of living. But the solemn vow is that we will rise again and do better.
So what does this all mean? When you boil down the poetry and the pledges of Chapter 18 of Mahendra Shah's The Awakening, it leaves the reader with a few crystal-clear maxims. The earth is not ours to own, it is ours to steward. We are not above the rest of the living world, we are among it. Together we rise.
It is a powerful reimagining of our place in the universe. It asks us to look at a forest not as timber, but as a community. To look at the ocean not as a fishery, but as a sovereign nation of its own.
To summarize this journey for you listening, today's deep dive explored a radical, deeply empathetic blueprint for rewriting humanity's relationship with the natural world. Through the lens of this hypothetical global summit declaration, we were challenged to view every creature from the pollinating bee to the remembering elephant as kin.
We explored what it actually means to redefine progress, moving away from extraction, domination, and GDP, and moving toward preservation, compassion, and coexistence.
This raises an important question, though. The text we explored today is presented as a solemn plea, a moral and philosophical document. But let's take this a step further and apply it to the mechanics of our reality.
What if humanity were to actually sign this document into international law tomorrow?
Imagine a legally binding covenant of beings.
How would our legal systems have to fundamentally adapt to accommodate sovereign non-human beings?
That completely upends how our courts currently operate. Property law, corporate law, environmental regulations, everything would have to be rewritten.
Who would be appointed to stand in a courtroom and legally represent the interests of the whispering forests?
Who gets to cross-examine a developer on behalf of the whales or the soil insects when a new shipping lane or a chemical factory is proposed?
And zooming in on a much more personal level for you listening, how would your own daily commute, the zoning of your neighborhood, or your weekly grocery trip have to change to ensure that you personally aren't in breach of contract with the earth?
That is a fascinating, complex thought experiment to sit with, and a perfect place to leave it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Mahendra Shah's The Awakening.
We hope this conversation sparked a new way of thinking for you.
The next time you step outside, whether you are in a concrete city or a quiet suburb, take a moment to listen to the rustle of the leaves or the song of a bird. Try looking at the world around you with this entirely new perspective. Until next time.